Block 1. The signature I never gave. I found out about the second mortgage from a text alert. $4,317 withdrawn from a joint account I hadn't used in 6 months. At first I thought it was fraud. Then I saw the bank's name. Mason Federal Lending. That wasn't my bank. And I'd never heard of the account number attached to the notice. My name. Right there on the statement. Rachel Jensen. Age 39. Teacher. Homeowner. Wife. Apparently now, co-signer on a loan I'd never touched. I stood in the middle of my kitchen, hands shaking, staring at the screen like it might blink away if I squinted hard enough. I called customer service. They asked for the loan ID. I gave it. Silence. Then, "Yes, Ms. Jensen. We show you as the secondary signer on this refinance. Originated 8 months ago." 8 months ago. Right around the time Jake, my husband, had said his construction business was hitting a slow patch. I'd believed him. I let him handle the taxes, the paperwork, the mail. That was my mistake. Because Jake hadn't just borrowed money. He'd refinanced our house, in my name, without telling me, without my signature. And somehow, he'd gotten it approved. I hung up and started digging. Loan documents? Nowhere in our files. Email trails? Erased. Bank logins? Changed. But I knew Jake. I knew he was smart, but not smarter than me. That night, I waited until he was asleep. Then I searched the attic, where he kept work stuff in an old locked file box. I found a folder labeled JJ Holdings. That wasn't his company name. Inside, loan documents, account ledgers, wire transfer receipts, and most damning, a notarized form with my forged signature. I held it in my hands, heart racing. The man I married? He didn't just lie, he stole from me. And he'd been using my name as collateral to hide whatever secret he was really funding. He thought I'd never notice. He thought I'd forgive. But Jake forgot something. I work with teenagers every day. I know what it looks like when someone thinks they're too clever to get caught. And now, he was about to find out what happens when you bet your future against the wrong woman. Block 2. The web. He wove. The next morning, I played it cool, made coffee, kissed him goodbye like always. Didn't say a word about the file box, the forged signature, or the money trail I'd mapped out from the shadows of our attic. Because I needed more than suspicion. I needed evidence. Jake had always played the laid-back provider card well. Flannel shirts, sawdust on his boots. Smelled like cedar and worked late. Neighbors loved him. My family adored him. He sent thank you notes. And meanwhile, he was draining my equity behind my back. But why? Construction had slowed, sure, but we weren't desperate. The first mortgage was manageable. We'd talked about refinancing, together. But he'd always said, "Let's hold off." Apparently, he didn't wait. I pulled his laptop while he was out meeting a subcontractor. He was lazy with passwords, still used the dog's name and our anniversary. Inside his browser, a dozen bookmarked bank portals. Not for us, for shell companies, LLCs I'd never heard of, Marlin Point Properties, West Pine Holdings, Firestorm Siteworks. I traced payments made from our mortgage refinance into these accounts. Tens of thousands of dollars, dripped out over months, each to different names. One stuck out, K.R. Alcott, a woman. I Googled it, got nothing. But on Facebook, buried in Jake's hidden friend list, one tagged photo, him, shirtless, beer in hand, leaning against a boat. And next to him, a woman in mirrored sunglasses, arm around his waist. The caption, "Weekend grind, big things coming." Date, 5 months ago. While I was grading essays and packing his lunches, my stomach dropped. He wasn't just stealing money. He was living a second life, with another woman, using my name, my credit, my home. I copied everything, screenshots, PDFs, metadata logs. Then I called a lawyer, Dana Pierce, divorce and fraud specialist with a reputation for quiet revenge and sharp heels. I sent her a summary. She called back in 10 minutes. "I hope you're ready to light a match," she said, because the moment we filed, Jake wasn't going to lose just me, he was going to lose everything. Block 3, building the case. Dana didn't waste time. She filed a fraud alert with the 3 major credit bureaus under my name. That froze Jake's financial reach immediately. Any attempt to access or modify accounts tied to me would now trigger a legal flag. Next came the paperwork: divorce filing, emergency financial protection order, petition for investigation into mortgage fraud and forgery. Because what Jake had done wasn't just betrayal, it was criminal. We couldn't prove his affair with K.R. Alcott. Not yet. But we could prove the refinance had been executed without my consent. The signature didn't match my legal one. The notary listed on the document? Fake. Dana sent a subpoena to Mason Federal Lending. They stalled. So she escalated. By the end of the week, we had a judge's order demanding full disclosure of the mortgage file, video verification from the branch that processed it, and contact logs from their compliance team. When they finally sent the documents, I found the proof. The notary, who signed off on the forged mortgage, was a contractor, not even certified in our state. And guess whose name popped up in the notary's payment records? Firestorm Siteworks, Jake's Phantom LLC. He had paid someone to fake a mortgage notary stamp, and the bank hadn't verified it. Now they were on the hook too. Meanwhile, Jake was still smiling, still coming home late, still pretending like I was none the wiser. So I let him. Because Dana had a strategy. We wait until he uses your name again. Then we catch him in the act. And sure enough, 2 days later, a flagged transaction hit my account. A $9,500 transfer request to a company in Arizona, initiated from his IP address. Dana pounced. We filed a temporary restraining order, preventing Jake from accessing any marital assets, then served him with divorce papers. In the driveway, in front of our neighbors. He turned white. "What the hell is this?" he snapped. "I'm protecting what's mine," I said. He laughed. "You won't get a dime. You can't prove anything." I smiled. "Oh, Jake, I already have." He didn't know I had recordings, emails, metadata. He didn't know every lie he'd told was now time-stamped. He didn't know the woman he married, the one he underestimated, had just become the plaintiff in a case that would shred his entire financial facade. Block 4, the House of Cards. Jake's confidence didn't last. By the following week, the walls started caving in. First, the bank froze his accounts. Mason Federal had launched their own internal investigation to cover themselves, and once they saw the fake notary and false documentation, they did what all guilty corporations do. They protected themselves and threw Jake under the bus. I received a formal apology from their legal department, sanitized, clinical. "We regret the failure in our verification process and will cooperate fully with any legal inquiry." Translation? They were terrified, and they should have been. Dana filed a motion to invalidate the second mortgage entirely on grounds of fraud. If the court approved it, the loan would be erased, as if it had never existed, and any equity Jake had pulled out would become his debt alone. He tried to fight back, hired a lawyer, claimed mutual consent, said we'd agreed informally, but Dana destroyed him in discovery. She had proof that none of the communications, payments, or legal authorizations bore my signature or approval. She even pulled cell tower data showing I wasn't T even in the state when some of the papers were supposedly signed. Then we dropped the bomb. A subpoena to K.R. Alcott's financials, tied directly to Firestorm Siteworks. Jake tried to block it, claimed she was just a business partner, but her bank records showed otherwise. Airline tickets for 2, boat rental charges under Jake's name, an Airbnb in Napa Valley, booked the same weekend he'd told me he was at a contractor convention. This wasn't business. This was extramarital embezzlement. Dana filed a fraud claim against Firestorm as a shell company used to launder stolen marital funds. Jake's lawyer stopped answering our emails after that. By the time we got to court, he looked like a shadow. Pale, frantic, dressed like a man who had worn confidence as armor, and now stood completely exposed. The judge reviewed the evidence, then spoke only 12 words. "You forged her name. You don't get to keep the house." Case closed. Mortgage voided. Jake was ordered to repay the entire loan sum out of his assets, face a criminal investigation for wire fraud, and relinquish all rights to our home, my retirement accounts, and anything else tied to my name. And me? I walked out of that courtroom with my head held high. Because I hadn't just escaped a liar, I'd buried the truth in court filings. And now? Jake's empire of lies was officially condemned. Block 5. Ashes and Aftermath. Jake moved out 2 days later. He didn't say goodbye. Didn't pack everything. Just threw clothes in garbage bags and slammed the door hard enough to make the kitchen glasses rattle. It was almost poetic. The man who tried to own my life couldn't even organize his own exit. The neighborhood took notice, of course. He'd always played the charming handyman husband, mowing lawns, fixing fences, waving politely on his way to site visits. Now? People avoided eye contact. Rumors traveled fast. By the end of the week, someone had keyed the words "thief" into the side of his truck. I didn't do it. But I didn't feel sorry either. Jake's spiral continued. One by one, the shell companies collapsed. Without the equity from our house and the fraudulent loans, his side projects folded like cheap lawn chairs. Firestorm Siteworks was audited and fined. His license as a contractor was flagged for investigation. He tried to pivot, claimed it was all a misunderstanding, told mutual friends I had framed him in a bitter divorce. But screenshots don't lie, and neither do court transcripts. Then came the final blow. Dana and I filed a civil lawsuit against Mason Federal Lending for negligence, failure to authenticate loan documentation, and breach of fiduciary duty. It wasn't about money, it was about precedent. Banks needed to know. You don't get to enable abuse and walk away unscathed. 3 months later, they settled. Quietly, generously. With a sealed agreement and a financial restitution sum that changed my life and my retirement plan. I bought the house outright, removed Jake's name from the deed. Then I did something he never expected. I joined a local support group for financial abuse survivors and started sharing my story anonymously. At first, I thought it would just help me heal. But then, other women began opening up. About credit cards opened in their names. About joint accounts quietly drained. About partners who weaponized paperwork like a form of gaslighting. And I realized, Jake hadn't just underestimated me. He'd underestimated what happens when we start comparing notes. Block 6. Reclaiming the narrative. 6 months later, I stood on stage at a financial literacy seminar hosted by a local women's nonprofit. I wasn't a speaker by profession. But that day, I was a warning wrapped in a story wrapped in a legal victory. The session was titled, "When Trust Turns to Theft, How to Protect Yourself Financially in Relationships." There were about 60 women in the audience, a mix of ages, some wide-eyed and quiet, others holding coffee cups like shields, and every single one of them had the same look I once had. I never thought it would happen to me. I told them everything. About the fake mortgage, about the forged notary, about how it did not feel like theft until it emptied my accounts and rewrote my name into contracts I'd never seen. Financial abuse doesn't always look like violence, I said. Sometimes it looks like your partner handling the paperwork and you not asking questions because you trust them. They nodded. One woman wept quietly in the third row. Another raised her hand and asked if she could still sue her ex, even if it's been 2 years. After the talk, 3 different attendees approached me. One whispered, "He put everything in my name," and then ghosted. Another said, "Your story? That was me in 2019. The third just hugged me, said nothing, and I understood her completely. Because this story, it wasn't just mine anymore. I started a blog called Blind Signature, a play on the legal term. I published weekly breakdowns of how to read your own loan documents, how to pull your credit reports, how to spot fake LLCs. It grew faster than I expected. Within weeks, lawyers reached out asking to partner. Journalists asked to share my case file. Even a fintech startup offered to sponsor a mini course for newly divorced women rebuilding their financial identities. Jake's name was never mentioned publicly, but he knew. He sent me a one-line email through a burner account. Hope it was worth it. I didn't reply, because I didn't need to explain myself to the man who tried to erase me. I had turned his betrayal into a roadmap, and every time someone found their way out because of it, that was worth everything. Block 7. When the system listens. 2 months after launching Blind Signature, I was invited to meet with a legislative advisory committee in Sacramento. They were reviewing new consumer protection laws, including one focused on coerced consent in financial agreements. They wanted my input, not as a lawyer, not as a financial expert, but as a survivor. I sat across from a table of suits and state representatives and told them what the legal documents could nate. The systems that failed me didn't just miss a forged signature. They missed every red flag that comes before the pen ever touches paper. I told them how a notary wasn't verified, how the bank ignored its own protocols, how I had to spend thousands in legal fees just to prove I hadn't assigned my own name. They listened. One woman on the panel, State Senator R. Young, leaned in and said, "We need to name this, because if we can name it, we can start stopping it." By the end of that year, a new bill had been introduced, the Marital Financial Transparency Act. It would require dual consent on any second mortgage involving a shared residence and mandate recorded confirmation for all co-signatures. It wasn't a silver bullet, but it was a start. I wasn't trying to become a symbol, but somehow, I had become a precedent. Jake, meanwhile, had relocated out of state. He tried starting another LLC under a new name. It lasted 6 weeks before it folded. Word spreads fast when your name's been dragged through public court records and online whistleblower forums. I no longer monitored him, but occasionally people sent me screenshots, updates. I never asked for them, but each one reminded me he was no longer invisible. And more importantly, neither was I. Because for years I had been the quiet one, the trusting one, the "don't worry, I'll sign it later" wife who didn't ask for logins or demand paper copies. But now, I was the standard by which other women were catching fraud before it started. The woman they referenced when they asked, "Do you have anything in writing?" The one who made silence a liability for the abuser, not the victim. Block 8. From victim to vanguard. The deeper I leaned into advocacy, the more I saw what Jake had tried to take from me. Not just money or stability, but credibility. He wanted me to doubt my instincts. He wanted me small. He wanted me quiet. But instead, I'd become the voice women Googled when they felt that gut-level panic, when a loan didn't make sense, when their name showed up somewhere it shouldn't, when their partner insisted everything was fine. I was now featured in webinars hosted by credit unions and community banks, interviewed on financial justice podcasts, quoted in an article titled, "How One Woman Changed Mortgage Law in California." And I didn't do it alone. I partnered with Dana, my lawyer, to create a free toolkit. Before you sign, a checklist for marital consent. Thousands downloaded it in the first week. I started getting letters, emails, one from a woman in Missouri who found a secret HELOC loan in her name because of my checklist, another from a single mom in Oregon whose ex had drained her child's college fund through a shell account, and now had the evidence to fight back. But the most powerful message came hand-delivered. From a local teacher, just like me. She showed up after one of my talks, eyes brimming. "I used to think women like us were just unlucky," she said. I smiled. "No, we were targeted. There's a difference." She nodded. Then she pulled out a folded document, a loan agreement, and pointed to the signature line. It's not mine, and now I know what to do. That was the moment I knew. Jake didn't just lose a court case. He lost his power. Because what he tried to do to me, he can never do to another woman again, not without her knowing exactly what it looks like. Because I made sure of it. Block 9, the final ledger. A year to the day after the mortgage fraud was voided, I stood alone in my kitchen. The same kitchen where it all started, where I got that first text alert. Where I realized the man I loved had traded my trust for credit and a cheap boat rental. But this time, the space felt different, warmer, mine. The title to the house was in my name now, fully, cleanly, legally. I'd repainted the walls, replaced the light fixtures, donated the old dining set we'd picked out together. The whole place felt like it had exhaled, finally rid of the lies that once hid inside it. Then I opened the letter. It was from the DA's office. Jacob Jensen has accepted a plea agreement in lieu of trial for 1 count of financial fraud and 1 count of forgery. No jail time, first offense, cooperation, blah blah blah. But he was ordered to pay restitution to the state and complete a financial ethics rehabilitation program. The irony? He was now legally required to learn the very laws he thought he could sidestep. I folded the letter and filed it away. Not because I needed it, but because someday someone else might. Because that's what stories like mine become. They start as warnings. Then they become blueprints. And finally, they become weapons. Jake had tried to silence me with a forged signature. I answered with a legal precedent and a generation of women smarter than he ever counted on. The final number on the ledger wasn't the mortgage sum. It was every woman who now asked questions sooner. Every fraud stopped before it started. Every voice that said, "Wait, that doesn't sound right." And that was priceless. Block 10. My name, my power. Some names fade from documents. Some get burned into court records. But mine? Mine became a banner, Rachel Jensen. Once a signature on a forged mortgage, now a cited source in financial protection workshops. A guest speaker at women's legal conferences. A story shared in HR manuals about coercion and control. I didn't plan to be a symbol. I just refused to be a casualty. Jake, somewhere in Nevada now, keeps a low profile. He's listed as independent contractor on one public directory, but no one calls him anymore. Even predators have expiration dates when someone breaks the silence. I occasionally wonder what he thinks when he sees my name trending in a podcast title, or reads an article about the mortgage wife who fought back. But I don't linger there long, because my life isn't about him anymore. It's about every woman who ever doubted herself at a signature line. Every partner who looked the other way because he handles the money. Every person told, "Just trust him." I trusted. Then I testified. And now, I teach. Because money and marriage were never meant to be weapons. And the only signature that matters now is the one I give with consent, power, and full control. My name isn't just clean again. It's stronger than it ever was.